It's the second day of the truce between Israel and Hamas, and a much-awaited second round of hostage exchange has taken place. Hamas has released 13 Israeli and 4 Thai hostages in exchange for the freedom of another 39 Palestinian prisoners and detainees. This is how Hamas's armed wing released the hostages from captivity. The hostages were handed over to the Red Cross for safe passage into Israel.
Bye now. Goodbye. Wake up.
The doctor waiting also there, so okay. Okay.
The Red Cross vehicles carried the second round of the released hostages through Egypt's Rafah border crossing. And finally, the cars ferry the hostages through the south of Israel to camps set up by the Israeli Defense Forces for the rehabilitation of the captives. The entire exchange of hostages, it was monitored by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu has been monitoring the exchange process since yesterday. In return, the Israeli prison authorities released 13 Palestinian detainees. The prisoners were welcomed home in East Jerusalem. The most prominent individual released was Israel-Hamas, who was convicted of detonating a gas cylinder in the car at a checkpoint in 2015. She was sentenced to 11 years in prison for wounding a police officer. Celebrations broke out in several parts of Palestine's West Bank to celebrate the release of prisoners from Israeli jails. But the second hostage prisoner exchange took several hours to materialize. Hamas delayed the second release yesterday, claiming that Israel had failed to comply with the preset terms regarding the entry of relief trucks into northern Gaza. Disagreement over the criteria for releasing prisoners also led to the delay. Hamas decided to continue the temporary truce only after Egyptians and Qataris assured that Israel would abide by all of the agreed terms. Now, for more on this, we're being joined by Edward P. Joseph. Mr. Joseph is a senior fellow at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and foreign policy analyst. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
You're welcome.
So, as I mentioned, the second batch of hostages have been released. This, of course, did not happen without its share of issues. As we know, this deal was delayed. The release of the second batch of hostages, it was delayed. Now, what's your take on how the truce has proceeded so far?
Well, so far this comes as very welcome news to anyone who is concerned about human suffering, and that is the suffering of both Palestinian civilians in Gaza and also Israeli families and an entire nation of Israel that is so concerned and worried about the hostages that were criminally taken by Hamas on October 7th. And so this is welcome relief to have this release of these hostages, one as young as 3 years old, And this comes, of course, thanks in part to President Biden's personal intervention here. It shows how concerned the President of the United States is. President Biden spoke with the Emir of Qatar this morning to ensure that the prepared and arranged hostage release, the exchange, the release of Palestinian prisoners, and the release of the Israeli hostages criminally seized, abducted there from Israel on October 7th would proceed, and indeed it did. And this gives some momentum and some hope that there will be a further truce and that is calm for Palestinian civilians, increased humanitarian aid for Palestinian civilians, and, of course, further release of Israeli hostages and internationals that have nothing to do with this conflict, including those Thai civilians who were released. Please.
Right, sir, absolutely. That being said, despite there being some concrete progress in this war on ground, uproar and protests have continued. We've seen there's a lot of agitation still. What is your assessment of how things will proceed going forward? Israel, as we know, has made it clear that this is not the end of the war and that the war will continue. So it's fair to say that their hunt for Hamas will continue. So what's your assessment of how things will go forward?
Well, I would say that as you put it, the hunt for Hamas has international backing. This has the backing of President Biden, who has not stated that Israel has to agree to a ceasefire, some type of agreed, prolonged halt to the military operation against Hamas. President Biden, of course, wants Israel to focus on Hamas and to take maximum efforts to minimize the Palestinian civilian casualties. That's what President Biden wants to see. But there's no pressure. Even here from within President Biden's own party, you have Bernie Sanders, who has no hesitation to call Hamas a terrorist organization. He representing the progressive left wing of the Democratic Party, calls on Israel to stop indiscriminate bombardment. But even Bernie Sanders, this is the left wing progressive leader in the United States, does not call for Israel to halt the military campaign against Hamas. So, and Israel retains a lot of support within the European Union, also from Canada. So the operation to oust Hamas, not to inflict pain on Palestinian civilians, which of course who have suffered tremendously in this 50-day-old conflict, but the operation to go after Hamas remains in place while this humanitarian pause and these exchange of hostages and the release of Palestinian prisoners continues. Please.
Right, sir. Also, I'll just let my viewers know that these are the live visuals that we're getting from the Sheba Medical Center in Tel Aviv. These are the live visuals that are coming in at this point. Of course, we're tracking the developments on this truce very closely here. Now, sir, also we've seen that mediation efforts by Egypt and Qatar have continued. They are, in fact, hoping for an extension to this 4-day truce. So do you think an extension of this truce is in the offing?
Well, that is, of course, the big question. Hoping, of course, for the welfare of everyone concerned, including Palestinian civilians in Gaza, that the next 2 days of the agreed 4-day humanitarian pause will continue as planned, with the exchanges as planned. The question, of course, is what happens then on the 5th day. Now, the terms of the agreement that negotiated with the assistance of Qatar and Egypt have not been made public, but it has been reported several times that Israel has agreed to extend the pause 1 day for each additional 10 Israeli hostages who've been released. And let me add here quickly, there's been some attempt to try to equate the Israeli hostages, criminally seized, some including a now 10-month-old baby taken by Hamas, an Israeli baby, a Jewish baby taken by Hamas, among the hostages criminally seized. There's been some effort to equate this with the Palestinian civilians. And I would just read here from the Secretary General of Amnesty International, who writes, this is a quote from Agnes Kameyard, Secretary General of Amnesty International, in addition to horrific summary killings of civilians, which took place in several locations across southern Israel by Hamas, at least at this time she was writing, 150 hostages have been taken into Gaza, including some children and foreign nationals. She writes, Secretary General of Amnesty International, the abduction of civilians is prohibited by international law, and hostage taking is a war crime. Again, that's the head of Amnesty International. So there's no equivalence here. There's no equivalence between Palestinians who have been arrested and received a court proceeding and imprisoned for example, attempted terrorism, and a 3-year-old or even a 9-month-old baby seized by Hamas in its criminal and horrific operation on October 7th. Please.
Mr. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us on the show with your insights and perspective on this.
You're welcome.
That was Mr. Edward P. Joseph joining us on the broadcast. We are, of course, tracking all the developments that are coming in from the Israel-Hamas war front, where there has a 4-day truce is in effect. These are the live visuals that we're getting from the Sheba Medical Center in Tel Aviv. As you know, of course, the second batch of hostages have been released by Hamas. This includes 13 Israelis and 4 Thai nationals, which have been released in the second batch in this swap that is taking place currently. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been monitoring this prisoner and hostage exchange since yesterday. We will, of course, continue to bring you all the developments on this. These are the live visuals that we're getting in right now from Sheba Medical Center. Of course, we'll keep bringing you the live visuals from Tel Aviv, Israel. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.